Hey, welcome to Broke Tech, and this is your boy Johnny, and today we're going to be doing the Ultimate RGB Beginner's Guide. So in this video, we're basically going to be talking about RGB for your computer, for your PC builds or your gaming builds, or whoever just wants to go ahead and add RGB lights. Now, the reason I decided to make this guide for beginners is because I simply think that there's not many YouTubers out there who really do a good explanation of what you should know before you actually install RGBs into your computer. The first thing that I'm going to be talking about in this video is basically motherboard compatibility. Now, this is actually very important that you actually know motherboard compatibility with RGBs because this will save you a lot of time and it will help you in the long run whether you decide to buy some RGBs for your computer. Now, there are two different types of motherboards out there that are recently going out, and mainly the new motherboards have this thing called RGB headers. Basically, is a pin that goes into your motherboard where you can connect your RGB stuff, and I believe sometimes they have more than one slot where you can connect RGBs that allow you to connect your fans or your LED strips. Now, the unique thing about these RGB headers is that the motherboard comes integrated with it, which will allow you to actually control the software via your computer. So what I mean by controlling your RGBs via your computer is basically there's softwares that allow you to change the fan speed, change the colors, or change the patterns of your RGB, such as iCUE and Auroras, and some other companies make it as well as MSI, I believe. Now, these newer motherboards are super expensive that they literally add like they're like at 200. So the majority I've seen they're like at 200, and as a broke tech enthusiast, I really do not want to pay for more expensive motherboards in my computer. So basically, if you have this header in your RGB motherboard, that's great because you will probably save a lot of time and a lot of pain later on from dealing with a old motherboard that does not have it. Now, there is a solution for people who do not have a motherboard with a RGB header. There's actually this devices that they sell from different companies, and believe it or not, they can get quite expensive. They can go up to $80 to $20, and personally, I like this one that was on Amazon that's called a PCIe. It has a PCIe, and this product basically allows you to connect like 4 RGB slots. It basically does the same thing that the RGB header does in a expensive motherboard. So if you want to do that, you will be able to connect RGBs via your old motherboards via PCIe slot. So you can buy different types of these fan controllers, or RGB controllers is what they call them. There's several different ones out there. There's Corsair makes some, Thermaltake makes some for their fans, and some other companies like Coolmaster also make some. Now, some are compatible with different RGBs, for such as your LED strips or your fans as well. So make sure that the fan controller that you do buy is compatible with any universal RGB or any universal RGB that uses the software such as iCUE or Sync or any other software. Now, if you get this RGB fan controller and because your motherboard doesn't have an RGB header, you will definitely as well be able to lose a lot of headaches later on if you haven't already purchased it. So if you're gonna go into RGB and you're gonna go either the cheap route or the expensive route, which are RGB, make sure that you at least have a fan controller RGB or RGB header from your motherboard. This will save you a lot of headaches later on, trust me. Now, one of the reasons why I decided to talk about the motherboard or the fan controller that you will need is because I'm a complete idiot and I actually found out how to actually have some RGBs that weren't compatible with my computer because I did not have a fan controller either, and now I know. So now, I know they sell different RGBs for old motherboards that you don't even need to buy a fan controller, but let me explain the difference between a RGB software that is compatible with Sync or as well as iCUE it's pretty cool to have these compatibilities on your fans or LED strips because you can just sync them all together and have like a pattern that will control the RGBs via these softwares if you have a RGB fan controller or if you have a motherboard compatible with the RGB headers. But believe it or not, it's not the end of the world if you don't buy a fan controller. If you want to go the cheapest route, you can also get some RGB fans that basically they do not connect to your motherboard, but they connect to a Molex pin connector, which usually has like 4 pins or 3 pins, and basically that's how it powers itself. And basically you just got to do some power supply to your Molex connector via your power supply, and you'll be able to actually be able to connect them via your software. So for example, I bought a fans that were from a brand called Up Here that basically they don't connect anything to the motherboard. It's just a direct connection to your power supply, and basically that allows me to, it has like its own little fan controller that connects into your power supply, and basically it has nothing to do with your motherboard, and you only get a really cheap controller, I believe, that will only allow you to control everything via that controller. It's like a little kind of knockoff or cheap brand controller that it's still pretty cool, but you cannot do anything via your computer. Now there's the fans that you will be able to have a compatibility with the RGB controller or the sync software or the IQ software that you can go ahead and actually do. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, why would you want to now you got the fans in installed, but the situation I came up with when I learned about the RGB controller and why it is a pain in the headache, because some people want to personally upgrade their old fans because their old fans have a better RPM. So for example, for liquid coolers, I would think liquid coolers would be a great example for fans. Basically, your liquid cooler is really highly recommended that you keep the original stock fans, or you find expensive ass Corsair fans that are literally like 2,700 RPM. So my liquid cooler is a Corsair and it has 2,700 RPM, and it has no RGB or in it, the fans, and I wanted to replace it. When I first started doing my research, I wanted to replace it with a RGB fans, but a lot of people have said in different forums that they do not recommend you switch your original stock fan. You can switch your original stock fan, but you're probably going to have to spend a really expensive amount of money to buy a static PMWM fan from your liquid cooler in order to have a really good RPM. In other words, they're just super expensive with RGB. But there was this little device that a company, not really a device, but a frame called a Phanteks mounting frame. This company literally decided to upgrade old fans, and I went off of Amazon and bought these little LED things, two of them for my 120 mm or millimeters, I don't know, whatever they call it, fans, and basically they were not compatible with my motherboard because I didn't have an RGB fan controller or I didn't have an RGB header, so the LEDs never came up. And basically you mount this up to your stock ones so they can look like they have the illusion of being RGB fans. And that's where the issue came, where I feel like a lot of people who are doing RGB, and I know most people will replace their fans for the and probably use one of the crappy ones that use like the ones that I use that don't have any integration with the motherboard, but it's really not recommended. You really need to keep those static PWMs on your liquid coolers to make your RGB look really nice. As well as for the fans of RGB, there are compatible LED strips on your that are via controlled remote, and that literally have no compatibility with your motherboard integration. And these are stuff that you definitely should watch out, because if you don't have that RGB fan controller, you're just gonna waste your money, and you're not even gonna be able to connect it if you want to upgrade a original stock fan with the RGB. Those are just some stuff that of some issues that you may come up with, but the point of this video is that if you decide to upgrade a stock via a stock cooler, definitely recommend get a RGB fan controller or a RGB motherboard that's already has the compatibility, because it just saves a lot of stuff in the future. And honestly, I think the best thing to do on your motherboard is buy one with RGB, or if it's too expensive, there's definitely cheap options of RGB fan controllers out there that are compatible with any type of RGB. That just go really cheap out there on Amazon. Um, and it will save you a lot of headaches like it did me. But if you're just one person that doesn't really care about the integration, you can live with the remotes, just change everything on the remotes, then there are a lot of options that you can do for your RGB, where you won't literally have to go out and purchase a fan controller or RGB, because they literally just connect to your Molex pin. And I feel like that's probably the cheapest way to go if you're gonna go with the cheap route of RGB. Now, RGB literally does not add anything of performance on your computer. It's just an aesthetic thing that looks nice on tempered screen cases for PCs, and I feel like it's really not necessary. Now, there is one more thing that I want to mention. Some RAMs come compatible with RGB already. You just insert it, the lights come out, and wow, you're amazed by the colors of RGB. But there's also ones that you can also connect to, like a pin in the back, or just connect it somewhere to your fan and change the colors as well. And it's the same thing that goes with the RGB fan controller. There's some that will be compatible, and there will be some that you via control, which it's something that RGB people should know. Now, personally, I decided to make this video simply because I think that this hasn't really been explained to a lot of people when they first get RGB, and I haven't really seen that many videos out there that are really concrete, or actually tell you a good explanation of the RGB stuff. So anyways, thanks for watching my first video on Broke Tech, and we're probably gonna be making some more videos. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, because I need to do more videos and that'll motivate me. So peace out.